Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to be here to present and share my works with you all. Okay, so I hope I can see it from here, but before I go showing my projects, I think it's important to share with you the place where I come from, because the land, the climate, and the culture and history has a lot to do with the way I shape my architecture. So it has a lot of influence, a lot of ingredients that I take from that and work through with my architecture. Okay. So that's Bangladesh. Let me explain. That range that you see over there is actually the Himalayan Range. And from Himalayan Range comes out two major rivers. One is the Brahmaputra, the other is the Ganges. And as these two rivers flow into the Bay of Bengal, which finally goes into the Indian Ocean, it creates a delta. And that delta, the Ganges Delta, is actually the largest delta in the world. And that's where Bangladesh is actually located. It's a land of rivers. Yeah, we have about 700 rivers running through this whole place. And since it's delta, it's actually land on water. So actually the water and land, there is no difference between the two. You can see the softness of the soil because it's alluvial soil that's brought in by the water, and it accumulates and it creates this very soft earth. So the earth is actually very soft and fragile. So as the rivers shape and reshape, they change, they actually erodes at times, and again it emerges. So this whole notion of play of erosion and emergence is something that actually creates an interesting play in the landscape. And that shapes the way people think and work. What is water during the monsoon time is land during the dry season. So there is no boundary between water and land. So land which is water can turn into dry land where you can cultivate. So it's basically something which is not permanent. So this whole impermanence of the landscape plays an important role in the way people think, in the psyche of the people. That's very important. You can see that it's a very fertile ground, alluvial soil. So farming is one of the major occupations of people. And we have a lot of water, 700 rivers, I just said. So it's a very much water-based life as well. And as I mentioned, that impermanence and informality are two major aspects that shapes the people's lives. And if you see this image, which I find quite compelling and very nice, which is this, what you see is green, is actually water. This is water hyacinth, the plant. And quite often when there is not enough flow in the rivers, especially during the dry season, then there is this water hyacinth growth. And rivers, at that time, the boats are unable to take people from one side to the other side. So what they do, the boatmen actually bring all their boats together and they create a bridge, which is like a boat bridge. So this is how people try to negotiate and appropriate in our land. So there is this whole idea of living with the nature and not trying to oppose it or try to bring it to any kind of sort of trying to deal with it as it comes. Again, as you see, optimization of whatever we have. You don't really need much than that things that you see over there to make a salon. So that's basically it, a beauty parlor or however you call it. Climate. is, again, one other thing that is important. It's a subtropical climate. As you can see, that the Tropic of Cancer is running across Bangladesh, quite pretty much in the middle. So what we have is a subtropical climate. Rain during the summer months is something we consider as blessing. So it's wonderful, and people celebrate rain. And then again, we have a long, near about 5 to 6 months of dry season, and that's quite dusty because of the fragile and softness of the soil that we have. But in any case, what we have is a climate which is quite moderate. There is no high temperature or low temperature. It's pretty much within 29 to 30 degrees in an average. So you can really keep everything open. So pavilion form is perhaps the most ideal form that goes with our climate. And in this image here, which is a painting from the Bangla Ragini, where you see that it's all you basically need is a plinth to give you enough space or enough to take you out of the water. So there's this plinth, and then you have a roof on top of your head. These are the only two elements that you really need to live in our landscape. So that's why you'll see that most of the time what we do is pavilion forms, and this blurring of the edges, which is quite often you don't see in Europe. Here you need to close it off because of your extreme climate. In our climate, because of its modest or moderate temperature, we can keep things open. And so that is something I've done in many of my projects, trying to work out this idea of pavilion and how you can bring in the exterior inside the spaces. So this is one project which was done towards the very beginning of my career in the 1994, 95. And here you see that this is a courtyard, and as you open up the doors, it becomes one space, so the exterior and interior becomes one space. So this whole notion of pavilion as architecture was something I have worked on quite often. And here's again another project where this project is located somewhere around here against a very, this is one of the large spines of Dhaka city going north-south, and it's quite often very much in traffic, a lot of traffic in this street. So when we were working on this project, which is a 12-story residential building, again, this whole notion of how you can make your space open and breathable, because we have high humidity. And to tackle the high humidity, it's important that you make your space breathe. And that's why what we did was we tried to open up the edges on the sides, and it actually gives the public who are mainly on the street, in the jam, something like a public facade to look at. At the same time, it also is something like a breathing facade. It lets the air into the buildings. It is, again, a pavilion form, in my opinion, because it is taking in the air and actually blurs the edges the way we wanted it. So this is a developer project, so you see the developer renderings, and that's what the building is actually looking like. This is from the side. A similar kind of a concept which we worked out in another building, which is not complete yet. It ran into certain kind of difficulties because the client wanted sold off the land after we started building it. So basically it stopped for a while, but hopefully we'll be able to finish it. Again, the similar thing about cutting it to let the air in and making it as open and porous as possible so that it breathes. Courtyards are very important features in our land and are architecture, because courtyards are the places which is actually letting you breathe. And I think courtyards are always, I think even here, when I was walking around today in Paris, I've seen all these beautiful courtyards. And they are actually the heart or soul of any building, anywhere on earth you go to. So I think it's something we have common in everywhere. So for us, it's important because that's the place which lets the air in and out. For us, you must understand that air is very important because of the high humidity. We need the airflow, constant airflow. The draft of air should be there. The space must be a breathable space. The skin, whatever the building skin is, it has to breathe. So that breathability is very important for us. Here is something that a courtyard which I have tried out in many projects, and here you see that it shows that when you have a high volume of an atrium, the high volume, what it does is it creates this stack effect. The hot air goes up and it creates a draft of air from all sides. So that's constantly this airflow happens. And that's something you see here, this high volume of the courtyard in a project, which actually helps. Again, in another building where we have a courtyard in the middle, and there are courts on the sides, and kind of a 9-square grid plan. And it also does the similar thing. So that's the building, also done in brick. And you see that these are the corner courts, which brings in the air from there. And there is the high volume in the middle, which actually helps it to breathe. And on the top, there are all these pavilion-like spaces where people can just sit around and play. This is a project which is not built, but we won first prize, so I like showing it and sharing it. This is the site, actually, for the project, which is the French-German embassy, which is now pretty much under completion, but not designed by us. It's designed by another French architect. But what we did in this project, as you know, that embassies, especially this embassy project is interesting because here the French and the Germans have actually decided to build one embassy. And that's the site for us, if I go back. I'm sorry. So over here you see the site, which is right here. And there is the French school at the back, and it's basically a square site. And what they required was that you have setback, 25-meter setback from all sides, and which gave us a very small footprint, which is about this footprint, where all the high security areas, like where the ambassador is sitting, should be placed. So we placed all the things in the middle, and then again we created that courtyard that I talked about, which is like an atrium, here you see. And we cut the corners so that you can bring in light and ventilation at the same time. And all the offices were placed along the way so that it's all around. You see the section in here, you see that that's the volume of the central atrium space, and all the offices are on the edges. And that was our proposal for the French-German embassy. We won first prize with another French firm, but then they were given the job to do, and then it's pretty much now coming to completion, but something which I really like. As a material, brick is one of the only material I would say that we have, because it's delta, and delta, as a delta, it does not have any kind of stone as such. We only have earth or mud. So our vernaculars are generally earth, and when you bake the earth, you get brick, and so brick is our material. This is one of the monasteries, Buddhist monasteries, that you'll find from the 13th century. And we have all these different brick monasteries from old times that shows that this is the only material that used to be there. This is again terracotta, as you see, made out of also earth, baked brick. And that's why you'll see a lot of use of brick, because we have really good, high quality brick and brick masons. And also handcrafting. So most of our architecture projects that you see, even though high-rise buildings or what the 12-story building that I showed, everything is handmade. So a lot of handcrafting. And handcrafting means a lot of imperfections. And there is beauty in imperfection. And that's something I think we need to understand and celebrate. And that's something I like to celebrate as well. So what you see here, this glass finally turned into this table. And yeah, our brick masons, even our women work in the brick in our construction industry. And these are the brick masons that work with me. They come from the north part of Bangladesh, who are really good brick masons, and all the beautiful work that they produce are really unique. This is again another person who works with me for quite some time, and all these different things that you see handcrafted entirely with stones. These are all his work. And I think that's what we try to do. We try to celebrate the handcrafting and all the imperfection that comes with it. And quite often it's not possible that you give them a drawing and you expect them to understand drawing, because they understand that they have the skill, but they don't have the knowledge. So you have to draw them, and it's an important connection between the architect and the person who's actually building it. So there's a lot of interest. You have to have a very good connection with the people who are building it. So it's almost like a family relationship that starts to grow. So this is Dhaka. That's what you see. Here is Dhaka. And then we have all the low-lying water bodies around it. That's the Parliament complex over here. That's our airport. And you see that how densely built the whole city is. It's 16 million people living in 300 square kilometers of area. It's one of the densest and the fastest growing cities in the world. And you see that the green areas are so limited. Some here, little patches here. This is one large green area where one of my project is located, and I'll probably go and talk about this a little bit. And you see this is the landscape of the city. And that's constantly growing. This is there's about 45,000 people, 45,000 people per square kilometers of Dhaka city. So that's really a very dense place. So you need to understand the scale, the density, and when you build something there, how to build. That's kind of a big challenge for us. So what we do is, in many ways, try to create order in chaos. That's what I think is important. One other thing is, when you don't have a place to look at, when you don't have any green to enjoy, it's better to look within than to look without. And addressing this whole notion of informality is something that is a challenge. So this is the city of Dhaka, as you see, one of the densest places. So one of my projects is right here, somewhere in the middle. It's one of the low-income neighborhoods, informal settlements that has grown and has been there for quite some time now, and the government hasn't done anything to tackle that. And there I was offered by the member of the parliament to design a community center. And the project is interesting because it's a dense place. There's hardly any space, so there was this tiny space that was found. And since, as I said, that there was no lack of facilities, So the member of the parliament wanted me to design a community center. And it was like a phone call, and he told me that, can you give me a design within a week or two? So we just did something, like, okay, let's just draw something up and give it to him because it was his election pledge and whatnot. So we did this drawing. We created a drawing where we gave a few spaces which are to be used as for different purposes. We had the services at the back. I didn't even go to the site because he gave me only a week and there was no possibility of going to the site. So we gave the drawing, we gave him a 3D, a section, because we didn't think that he will build the building anyway. So this was what we did. And then there was nothing from him for about 3-4 years. So after 4 years, we get a phone call that the foundation is already done. So that's something you have to be ready to face when you're working in Bangladesh, that anything can happen. So the foundation was done. I've never visited the site. So that was not something you would expect a good architect to do. So we had to run to the site to see what's happening. And finally, we saw that, okay, as I said, that I've always tried to address this whole notion of order in chaos. And it was a chaos, as you see, all around. And that's the building that came up. So it wasn't that difficult in a way that this is what it's under construction. It's not complete yet. But you see the landscape, you see the cityscape, how it is densely built. And then there is a small space where the building is kind of coming up. And we found out that it's not that bad. It's sort of coming out quite okay. And yeah, so that's the construction in progress. So order in chaos, as I said, that's what my notion of architecture, working in Dhaka especially as a city. This is before I go to the next project, this I think is important to give you a little history of Bangladesh and how it came into being. And if you know that Bangladesh was a part of the Indian subcontinent, this is the whole map of the Indian subcontinent that includes India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. And these two maps show here, this was done during the British time, the colonial British time. And it shows, done in 1909, that shows the consensus of Hindu and Muslim population. And you see that the dense dark green areas are the Muslim, densely built, dense areas of Muslim, and over here as well. There's some over here. And the darker, the red areas are actually showing the Hindu population. And based on these, the whole Indian subcontinent was divided in 1947. And you see that India and Pakistan came into being. There was one of the largest forced mass migration that took place at that time. And Bangladesh at that time was East Pakistan, which was broken out of Bengal. Bengal was the main region, and from there, Bangladesh was carved out. So what you see, the red line here shows the Bengal map, and that's Bangladesh. And my family actually comes from this little pocket here. And they moved from here to here in Dhaka because we are from the Muslim part, and that though it was a very Muslim-dominated area, it went into Indian part. So they had to move from here to here. And this is one little reminiscence of the old house that remains with us. So that's my connection to the past. So from 1947 to 1971 is a story which actually is a story of struggle between these two, one nation, which was Pakistan, but East Pakistan and West Pakistan had about 1,700 kilometers of distance between the two. So except for the notion of religion, There was nothing common between us. We did not share the same language, we did not share the same culture, even the history was different. So there was a constant struggle between the two parts of Pakistan. And at the end, in 1971, Bangladesh, which was then East Pakistan, decided to be free. And we had a 9-month-long intense war from March 25 to 16th of December. And then after that, Bangladesh became a sovereign free nation. And in 1997, when I was in my second year after graduation, a competition was declared by the government to design the Independence Monument and the Museum of Independence. And we decided to participate, and we won the competition, and we designed the whole project. I think the reason why our project was chosen, and I think is important to understand, you see the city of Dhaka, and you see the densely built areas, and this is the place where the site is located. And if I give you a little history of the site, that's our project there, you see. Let me give you a little history of the project. The site, actually, which used to be, during the British time, a horse racing ground, in 7th March, this became one of the major public events where our father of the nation, we called him Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, who actually declared that our fight should be about the freedom. And that's when it triggered the war. And also in December, this is the ground where the Pakistani forces actually surrendered to the allied force of India and Bangladesh. So this is a very historic ground, and which is now also all kinds of, any kind of occupied movement or anything, cultural movements, everything takes place in this area. So that's why it's a very important place. It's in a way the heart of Dhaka city. And this is where we were supposed to design this museum. But again, you need to understand that this is the only, perhaps the only living green area or the park that we have left. So what we did is, this is the road that goes around, and all the public buildings are basically, public and cultural buildings are located on the edges. What we did, we took the minimum footprint that is required for a building, not to take away the park space that is probably the only park left for the city dwellers, and tried to concentrate it within a certain space. We created a walkway around it, and we placed all the different elements that are important for the project on that plaza. So what we had in program was a museum, the monument, which is to commemorate our independence, and basically that's it. So this is what you see is what we've done. We created a plaza, and as I said, that the history shows that if you want to celebrate the freedom or independence, especially in our case, it has come with a lot of sadness, a lot of sacrifice. So freedom, dream, aspiration, these are calling for something upward. And that's why what we've done is created a monument which goes upward. And sadness or sacrifice which you've lost are something that urges for the subterranean. So what we've done, we've taken the museum subterranean, and the plaza is basically the place where people celebrate, and to know the history, one needs to go down. So this whole duality that exists in our independence are brought in, both the sacrifice and the celebration of the freedom or independence. So these are all different elements that you see, which depicts the central circle here is a water body that is depicting the 9-month-long war that we had. There's a small hole that takes in the water down the tower. So it's like a journey. You go up, you walk, and then the wall takes you down into the museum. You go around the museum, you come out, and then you go to the tower. That's the plan of the museum underneath. So we come with a ramp down here, the audiovisual room. There's a small film that shows, and then you come down. These are the spaces of the museum. There's a small black area. You enter here. This is a place for the commemoration of the lost people and the struggle that happened. And then we come here, and then we go out. So this project, especially the tower and a certain part of the project, took us a long time to finish. It took us about 16 years. We started in 1997, and then we finished it in 2013 because of the political interest, and the government changed during that time. And so it actually went on for quite a while. And if you look at the concrete, the ceiling, it actually bores the whole story of that project. And the tower, as you go up, it's actually made out of glass, but glass is not the material. The material, as we intended, was light. So it's a space frame structure in the middle, but what we have is panels, but the glasses are actually stacked one top of the other. So what you see is a thick glass, and about 6 inches thick, and they are stacked one top of the other. And then we created a panel, and then it's placed there. So what it does is actually it refracts the light during the daytime. The refraction creates a certain play. And then in the evening, there's the tower, as you see. And in the evening, it's artificially lit from the sides, so it glows, creating an effect. So it's a tower of light. And we thought light is probably the most most appropriate way of depicting what is freedom or aspiration of people. This is during the nighttime. And on 16th of December, when we have our Victory Day, it's generally packed with people, so it's a celebration. So this is the city of Dhaka. And you see here the density and the buildings. And this is where also this whole mosque project that actually came with the Aga Khan Award is also located. So this is basically the city of Dhaka. And that's the point which is absolutely to the end of the city limit. That's the end of Dhaka city. And right there, the blue dot shows the position of the site of the mosque. Which is towards the end of the city. And that part of the city, if you see 2004-06, it was very much a farmland, an agriculture land. And slowly, as the city is growing, as I said, that it's the fastest growing cities in the world, and it's very quickly turned from farmland to settlements. And it's a place in transition. So when I was given this project to build, it was quite understood that this is a place in transition which is going to be built up entirely. So that is something I had to keep in mind. So this is the beginning of the mosque project, where, generally people have a prayer. And since there was no structure, and as you can see, it's all green area around, so it's actually that agricultural space. And under the jackfruit tree, the first prayer took place. And that's my grandmother who actually offered me the project. And that's her sitting there during that groundbreaking ceremony and the prayer. So as I started with the project, one was, of course, the city and the transformation of that land and that area. The other was about being a mosque. It's about how to approach the whole project. And in a way, for me, it was important to go back to the very beginning of mosque, how it came into being. So I went back into the history of mosque architecture. And if you see here, this actually shows the first mosque of Islam. And during that time, the mosque was basically brought out of a house form. So it was not what we see today as mosque, or we symbolize as mosque, but this was just a very basic, humble house turned into a larger space that would become a mosque. But then, of course, throughout history, we've seen the rich legacy of architecture, which was of mosque. That's the Mosque of Cordoba. This is Hagia Sophia, not a mosque, a basilica, but then again, it's the spirituality, the light is quite interesting, and I've always find these two spaces unique in the quality of space and light. And these are some of the mosques that are from our region, from Bengal. So Islam came into Bengal during the 13th century, 14th century. And these are the first mosques that were built out of brick. And in a way, the most authentic mosque form that till date exists. So that was something, again, so one is the city, the second is the original mosque form, which is devoid of any symbolic elements, and then the third is the uniqueness of what is Bengali mosque. And this is the situation of today, where you rarely see any kind of architecture, typology, morphology, nothing. It's just a place. It has this whole notion of a spiritual space or a religious space has kind of lost its glory. And you can see that's an apartment building, and how the symbols are coming out of nowhere. So that's the state of architecture of a mosque. And for me, that was something to work with, and that's what we did, actually. So what you see here, the landscape in transformation, you see construction going on all around. And that's why it was important for me to create that atmosphere. So these are some of the plans you see. This is from our 16th, starting from, let's say, 3rd to 4th century till 16th century, the Buddhist monasteries that we had, the Hindu temples, the Muslim mosques, and of course our parliament building. And from there, basically to some extent, taking essence out of that, I created my first initial concept. And the concept was that was actually the site that gave me a 75 feet by 75 feet space. And we created that square. And as you know, that the mosque, the prayer hall needs to be in a certain direction towards Mecca. So we shifted the square into introducing a circle in the middle, and to facilitate the shift of that square. And these are the basic plans. What happened is, with this project, which my grandmother offered me, and she offered a small sum of money with the project to initiate it. But then the later phases, we had to generate fund for the whole project, so that So we involved the community and we generated fund from the community. So in a way, what is important when you include the community, and I found that it really works pretty well because it gives them a sense of ownership. And a sense of ownership is something I find very important when you're doing a project, especially a public project or a community project, that gives them a certain value. And it's very important that people feel that they own the place. It's healthy for the growth of the building in the later times. So that's the plan of you see you enter here. These edges are the courtyards that open up. That's the central space, again, a pavilion, what I told you earlier, that pavilion forms are something very unique of our land and landscape. So the prayer hall is actually conceived as a pavilion because it opens on all four corners. And you enter from here, and you just do not enter directly. You come here, and then you have to take a turn, and then you enter here, so that, we pray 5 times a day. And as you come in from your daily work, you need to, your mind needs to be conditioned to be focused on the prayer. So that's why it's always, it was done in a way that it gives you that space in your mind to be ready for the prayer. And since the budget was very small and we had to involve the community to generate the fund, everything that you see surrounding the main prayer hall are made out of brick, because brick construction is cheaper. It's hand construction, and it does not involve a lot of money except for the labor, and the material cost is much less. And when it goes into concrete, that's when the cost is more. So that's why we tried to keep the concrete as little as possible and made the whole thing more into brick. So you see that it's a transforming landscape. It's not complete yet. There's all kind of construction going on. So at one point, this mosque will not be visible anymore. So there will be building coming up here on all sides. So it was important that you look within and not look without. That's why this whole prayer hall is actually wrapped around by this brick work. Those actually takes in all the different functions. But at the same time, it's very perforated. So there's enough light and air and ventilation that takes place without giving you any, creating any barrier or any kind of sound or visual barrier, but gives a space which is much more looking within. And this whole brickwork is load-bearing, as you can see. There is no concrete work. And light, I think, is a very important element in this building. As I said, that we did not have much fund to work with. The budget was very limited, generated by the community. So light became one of the major elements. And as I mentioned that I wanted to go back to the very beginning of mosque, what is important to understand in mosque architecture is that mosque came into being as a space of congregation. It was not only meant for prayer. It was meant for a space, to be a space where people gather. They, of course, say their prayer, but at the same time, it would be a space which is a space for community, for interaction, for sharing. Even administrative and judicial functions took place in a mosque. So this was a place where people congregate. And that's why it's important to, in a way, go back to that very form where it's open and it's inclusive and not entirely exclusive. And that was my understanding, and that's what I tried to focus on. That not to take in, what is symbolic these days, taking a dome or a minaret, which has become quite symbolic of a mosque these days, that people try to identify themselves with mosque as a dome, with a dome or a minaret, and without that it's not possible. But that was not the case from the very beginning of mosque architecture. So that's what I try to do, devoid of all symbolic elements, going very much to the essence of what it used to be, and to create something which is spiritual, a space which is a spiritual space. So light became one of the major elements for me to work with, which in a way brings this whole notion of spirituality into that space. And as I said, that the budget was very limited, so light is for free. You don't need to pay anything for the light, so we decided to work with light as much as possible. And this is what we are generally used to seeing in a mosque, people praying. And this is something we've introduced now. So you see, mosque, the main prayer hall, is not just a place where you pray, but you also have a nice gathering of people where everybody is sitting for a nice lunch. And that's Farooq Darakshani. He was there just a few days back, and we had a nice lunch inside the mosque. So in a way, we're trying to break out of that whole notion of mosque being a very exclusive space to much more inclusive a space. So to going to the last project I would like to show you is a project which is outside Dhaka. So Dhaka is basically the realm where I work. But this is a project which is interesting, which is in the southern part of Bangladesh. And this very beautiful painting that you see is the south part of Bangladesh. This is the Mangrove Forest, which is known as the Sundarbans, and home to the Royal Bengal tigers. And our project site is located right here. So the idea was that it's a resort, an eco-friendly resort. That's how the client wanted it to be. So the idea was that you will take a boat from here and through all the rivers, you'll come to Sundarbans, have maybe a one-night stay, and then go back to the site. And this is absolute delta, as you can see, all the rivers, and it's going to the Bay of Bengal. And being a delta, it's a fertile land. It is absolutely green, as you see here. These are all the villages. And our site is actually around here. This is one river, which is known as Kopotakko. There's another very thin river that runs here. So that's actually the site. And my client for this project was an American lady. She went to Bangladesh with a Fulbright scholarship and fell in love with the landscape. And she came to me with this idea that she wanted to build a resort which is close to Sundarban. She didn't have a land, she had no money, she was just an idea. And I said, okay, I will work with you. So we started looking for land. So there was no land, only based on this idea that we wanted to showcase what is Bengali culture, the authentic Bengali culture, which is of dwelling in the delta. And that's what came out. After 2 years of search, going to the site, different places, looking for a proper site or perfect site, that we finally found this land. And also she had to work hard on finding investors, and finally she was able to get a group of investors who were ready to finance the project. So after 4 years of land search, buying the land, investors, we were finally able to get the project going. So from the side, this is the kind of view that you get. So once you're really out of Dhaka, which is the dense city, it's really a beautiful landscape. You'll see all these nice green paddy fields, which turns entirely yellow during the winter season. These are mustard seeds and mustard. And cow carts are still something very much seen in the landscape. So the life is very slow pace, a very totally different landscape than the city of Dhaka. And so while this whole process of finding land and finding the investors were going on, I was sort of struggling what to come up with as a design. Because the kind of knowledge I have of being formally trained as an architect, it does not give me enough knowledge to go to the landscape like this and to create something of my own. So the idea for me was to learn from what exists in the land. And in a way, what we did was, this was something I wrote and I would like to read it. Rural Bangladesh is uniquely beautiful, the soul of the Delta land. It felt like a crime to invade this silence with the roaring noise of architecture. This project gives an opportunity to bring back the lost pride and belief in the wisdom of the land, crafted over hundreds of years of dwelling in the Delta. So that's what I did at the end, what we decided to do from the office, that we will go to the site, we will talk to the people who are there, who lives there, and we will try to create what absolutely a new knowledge base, trying to understand the wisdom that exists in the land. So what you see here is actually the land itself. These little water bodies are man-made. Generally, this is how people start building in the Delta. Because it's flat, they dig out ponds, and as they dig ponds with the earth, they create a mound. Right here, you see the mounds, and on the mound, they place their houses. So basically, digging a pond, creating a mound, and placing their houses. This is actually the wisdom. And the houses are basically small rooms clustered around spaces. So that's also something unique. And these houses are all built with mud. So mud, because that's the only material that exists, and using thatch. So we decided to go with mud, thatch, bamboo as our material, and using local technique of construction. So this was a study that we did over a period of a year. We had interns coming in from different places. A good group of interns came from Cornell University who did an extensive research. And that actually gave us a base or sort of a language to work with. And if you see these images, this roof form, which is the Bangla Roof, is very unique of Bengal, which has been taken by the Mughals, or even in our temples you'll see that. And this roof form is actually unique because it really works well with our kind of monsoon season. The water drains out very quickly. And that's something which you don't see anymore in the landscape because it's totally gone. So we decided to revive this roof form in a certain way. And this is the village home, very, I would say, something that every child's mind in Bengali, every child's mind, you would find this. If you ask a child to draw a village home, this is what they would draw. So that's kind of unique. These are all the different elements that we find in the landscape. So this is what we finally came up with. So that's how the site was. So we created a few walkways that would depict the river formation, and then everything was sort of scattered all around. That's our main master plan. As you see, that it's pretty much the similar way that you have the bungalows where people would be staying in the resort, and it's almost in a certain way that it creates, there is no certain space, but there is a flow of space as you see in the village homes. And we did the plans. These are the rooms, the bathroom, another room and bathroom. They're connected with a long veranda. And what we did is we did the plans, and then we invited all the locals to come and build it. So the whole project is being built by the locals who live there. It's again this whole notion of sense of ownership, because a resort in a delta where people will be visiting, and it's just not about building a project, but it's also about economically empowering the rest of the people who live in that location. So that's the idea we came up with. This is a young man from that location, and there are several young people there who are actually going to the cities like Dhaka, trying to find a living, make a living. So what we've done is we've encouraged them to stay back home and help us with the project, in a way to bring back this whole notion of pride in their own place, which is getting lost slowly in the villages. So he comes from the potter's village. This is his own landscape. You see pottery, that's his family, and his grandfather is the only person who has the knowledge of making pottery. And he doesn't have that skill or the knowledge. So we decided that's him. So we started working with him, and we've given him all the different projects. Let's do some potteries that we will need in the site and the location. So he went back to the grandfather, and there was this connection that was lost. So they connected again between the two different generations. And that's how the whole project started growing. So what we've done is we've brought in bricks, sun-dried mud bricks, and you see the plaster is getting made, plaster made out of earth, and that's the mud brick and the plaster and the mortar. So mud mortar and mud brick, and the roof is being constructed with wood and bamboo and thatch. So the locals are building the project. It's the plan that we've done, and now they're shaping the whole thing. So that's my roof consultant, you see, building the roof with thatch. That's our organic garden, our mud consultant. And here's all the consultants in a meeting. So I don't know if you call this architecture or not, because definitely I'm not there. I call myself invisible architect in this project because it's being built by the locals. And I think that's a very appropriate answer for this project, because my education does not give me the power, doesn't empower me with the power to build something there. But what is coming up, I'm quite happy with, because that's something very much of that land. And since mud houses turned into something in that location, people thought mud houses are for the poor people. And whenever they have some money, they start building houses with brick, 5-inch thick brickwork, which is really not hygienic or healthy to live in. But mud houses, which has like 30-inch thick walls, are beautiful, not only just aesthetically, but it's also very environmentally wonderful. And that's something they think is of a poor, or it gives the symbol of being poor. And that's something we wanted to work with, that it brings back that whole notion of pride. So it's the local earth and shaping it. And that's during the monsoon time. Well, that's just about it. Thank you so much.